Hi there, and welcome to part 2 of the Bible Project podcast. 66 books, an overview of each of the books of our Bible, book by book. And this is episode 2, and we've arrived at the book of Exodus, the book of the redemption of God. Exodus has been called by some the book of the departure, or the going out, and sometimes it's even referred to as the book of the redemption of God. The name Exodus literally means way out, and just like the title of Genesis, it also comes from the Septuagint. The Genesis story concluded with the family of Jacob settled in Egypt, and Exodus takes up that story approximately 400 years later, by which time the descendants of Israel had multiplied till they had become a nation in their own right, even though they're still based in Egypt. It is believed by many that Moses wrote the book of Exodus. The reason for saying this are threefold. The book itself indicates that Moses wrote it. References to that are found within it in Exodus chapter 17, chapter 24 and chapter 34. It has been attributed to Moses since the time of Joshua, and references to that are found in Joshua 8. And of course Jesus himself said in the New Testament in Matthew chapter 7 that Moses wrote it. Thinking about who it was written to, the recipients, we can acknowledge that the date of the Exodus is important. That is the event, not the book. And it has been argued about by scholars what exactly that might date be for quite a few centuries. But there are generally now two principal views held. The first places the events around 1447 BC, and the second perspective places the events around 1290 BC. In many, if not most of the books of the Bible, the condition of the recipients provided the motivation for the book's writing. But there are some cases where this is not true, and Exodus seems to be one of those. Exodus was not so much written for the people who received it at that time, as much as it was written for the generations that came after them, so that they would remember what God had done. When thinking about the message of Exodus, many say its subject is redemption. Granted, the first part of the book records the redemption of Israel, but the key to the subject of Exodus is the end of the book. The book shows how God delivered his people from slavery in Egypt, led them to Mount Sinai, and there formally confirmed the covenant made with Abraham, so that Israel might become a reality of a people who would belong to and live for God. The second half of the book deals with the tabernacle. After it was completed, God descends to personally inhabit it. Thus the subject of Exodus is not just the redemption, but it is clearly the purpose of the redemption of God. Apart from its value in recording the historical facts on which Israel's national and religious life was built, Exodus is also important in revealing much of the character of the God of all creation, who was God of Israel. Above all, he is seen to be a God who redeems. Israelites were expected to see their history not just as a collection of stories, but as a revelation to them of who God was. This book also reveals for the first time that God wants to dwell with his people. Also that this God, because of his holiness and justice, requires the punishment of the sinner, but yet at this one and the same time is the one who graciously provides the way whereby repentant sinners can come to him and have their sins forgiven and be brought into a living fellowship with the one true God. When we consider the purpose of this, it seems the purpose of Exodus was to remind the Exodus generation and those who would follow on, which includes you and I to this day, that God redeemed Israel from Egypt. And he did that in order to give them his law and his presence. Redemption is clearly a major theme in Exodus. God, by blood and sacrifice, redeemed them, and he delivers them from bondage. Then he makes a covenant promise with them, and he gives them the law, and then follows that with the instructions for a tabernacle, a place where he could dwell amongst them. Thus it is revealed that God's purpose in redeeming Israel was not just the defeat of the negative in delivering them out from Egyptian slavery, but it was also the application of the positive in that Israel could now know God's will and have God's presence dwelling in amongst them forever. So, in summary, Moses wrote to the Exodus generation to remind them that God redeemed them and made a covenant promise with them, which included giving them his law and dwelling with them. And today, God is still seen to redeem us, and he gives us his law, and he gives us his word, and he still blesses us with his presence